Most people don't leave because they stopped loving. They leave because they got tired of begging to be heard. Let that sink in. We think love is what keeps relationships together, but it's not. It's communication. Raw, honest, heart on the floor communication. Love without voice is a silent scream, and eventually it walks away. I remember a moment with someone I deeply loved, someone I thought I'd spend forever with. We were sitting inches apart on a couch, and yet it felt like there were miles of silence between us. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. The kind that builds when truths go unspoken and needs go unmet. And the worst part, neither of us knew how to break the silence. We just sat there pretending everything was fine, smiling at phones, talking about the weather, asking what's for dinner, while the real conversation, the one that mattered, sat locked behind fear and pride. It wasn't that we didn't care. We did. We loved each other. But love on its own isn't enough. You can love someone and still feel alone with them if you're too afraid to speak from your soul. If every time you try to bring something up, it gets minimized or brushed off, eventually you stop bringing it up. And when you stop talking about what hurts, it doesn't go away. It hardens. It turns into resentment, into bitterness, into a quiet knowing that you're not really seen anymore. I've learned that emotional distance, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow burn. The skipped conversations, the avoided eye contact, the swallowed emotions. It's telling yourself it's not a big deal when your heart is screaming that it is. And over time, we build walls, not to keep the other person out, but to protect ourselves from the ache of not being understood. Psychology teaches us that avoidance is a defense mechanism. It's a way to protect ourselves from what we fear: rejection, conflict, abandonment. And in many ways, it works for a little while, until the relationship starts to feel hollow, full of words but lacking in truth, full of moments but lacking in meaning. We're often more comfortable living with tension than facing vulnerability. But here's the thing. Silence isn't neutral. It's a message. When we avoid the hard conversations, we don't just avoid conflict. We avoid connection. And every time we pretend we're okay when we're not, we teach the people around us that our needs don't matter. It's easy to say, well, they should have asked, or they should have noticed. But healthy communication isn't about waiting to be rescued. It's about being brave enough to speak, even when your voice shakes, because no one can meet a need they don't know exists. I think back to that couch, that silence, and I wish I had said something, anything. I wish I had looked them in the eye and said, I miss you, even though you're sitting right here. Because that moment could have been a beginning, not an end. When you silence yourself to keep the peace, you start a war inside you that communication could have ended. And maybe, just maybe, saying the hard thing with a soft heart is what could have saved us. A friend once told me, I'd rather suffer in silence than say something and be seen as too much. And I felt that like a gut punch. Because I've been there too, caught in that tug of war between needing to speak my truth and being terrified of what it might cost me. I can still remember standing in a hallway, phone in hand, typing and retyping a message I never sent. My heart knew what it needed to say, but my fear was louder. It whispered things like, "You're too sensitive. Don't rock the boat. What if they leave?" We grow up learning how to swallow our pain with a smile. We are taught, sometimes directly, often silently, that our feelings are inconvenient, our needs are excessive, and our honesty makes us difficult. So we put our emotions on mute. We become experts at pretending, at choosing silence over conflict, at being likable instead of being known. But here's what no one tells you. When you keep shrinking your truth to fit into someone else's comfort zone, you eventually disappear. You don't even notice it at first. You just start editing yourself, softening the edges of your emotions, avoiding certain topics, laughing when something hurts, and slowly you lose your voice. Not because it was taken, but because you stopped using it. From a psychological perspective, this fear often stems from past experiences of emotional invalidation, where speaking up was met with rejection, punishment, or ridicule. The brain learns to associate vulnerability with danger. So we adapt, we self-abandon, and we call it peace. But it's not peace, it's performance. And the irony is, we think staying silent protects the relationship. But silence doesn't protect love. It suffocates it. It builds walls where there should be bridges. Because real connection requires real words. Words that are messy. Words that are uncomfortable. Words that risk misunderstanding but hold the power to bring us back to each other. I used to think that the goal of communication was to always say the right thing. But now I know it's not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about the courage to say, this matters to me, even when your voice trembles. It's about trusting that your truth is worthy of space, even if it's inconvenient. It's about showing up in relationships as a full human being, not a muted version of yourself. Because here's the soul deep truth. Healthy communication isn't about always saying the right thing. It's about being brave enough to say the real thing. And sometimes being brave looks like sending the text, starting the hard conversation, saying, I'm not okay, even when everything in you wants to pretend you are. You don't have to get it perfect, you just have to be honest. That's where real connection begins. Not in flawless words, but in fearless truth. A woman once looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, and said, he hears my words, but he never hears my heart. And that stuck with me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quietly devastating. Because I knew exactly what she meant. There's a specific kind of loneliness that grows when you're in a conversation and yet you feel invisible. You're speaking, you're opening up, you're trying, but the person in front of you is nodding just enough to seem engaged, while their mind is somewhere else, forming rebuttals, thinking of a comeback, or scrolling through their own internal distractions. We live in a world that values talking over listening. We praise the ones who speak up, debate well, argue their point. But deep, transformative relationships, they're built in the quiet spaces. The pauses, the eye contact, the gentle, tell me more. I remember being in a conversation with someone I love, and I was trying to explain a moment of deep shame. My voice cracked. I couldn't find the words, and all I needed was for them to lean in and just stay with me. But instead, they got uncomfortable, they offered advice, they tried to fix it, they rushed to make it better. And that's the thing, most of us aren't bad listeners because we don't care. We're bad listeners because we're afraid of sitting in someone else's discomfort without trying to solve it. We think listening means having answers. But listening, real, grounded, heart-centered listening, isn't about answers at all. It's about presence. It's about saying, I'm not going anywhere, even in your pain. Psychologist Carl Rogers once said, when someone really hears you, without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good. Because to be deeply heard is to be deeply loved. And here's what I've come to believe. Listening, true, open, empathetic listening, is a radical act of love. It requires us to quiet our egos, our impulses, our discomfort. It asks us to slow down, to stop assuming, to stop needing to win or fix or finish someone's sentence. And when we do, when we really show up with both ears, an open heart, and no agenda, that's where connection is born. That's where healing begins. Most people aren't looking for solutions. They're looking for a witness. They want someone to say, I hear you, I see you, and I'm not afraid of your truth. I've sat across from people who've said some of the hardest things they've ever said out loud. Confessions, regrets, heartbreaks. And do you know what made those moments safe? Not my advice, not my perspective, but my silence, wrapped in warmth, because we heal in the presence of someone who doesn't flinch. So if you love someone, really love them, listen. Put the phone down, turn toward them, not just with your body, but with your whole being. Let them finish. Let them stumble through the hard parts. Let the pause stretch a little longer than is comfortable. And then say, I'm here. That might be the most powerful sentence in the language of love. Because people don't need perfect answers. They need your undivided presence. I once stayed in a relationship where silence was a weapon and words were landmines. 1 minute, everything felt normal. Conversations flowing, jokes exchanged, laughter echoing across the kitchen. And then suddenly, something shifted. A look, a tone, a comment too sharp to be a joke, and then nothing. Cold silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that feels like punishment. It's the silence that doesn't just say, I need space. It says, you don't deserve a response. It says, you don't matter enough to be acknowledged. I can't tell you how many nights I sat at the edge of a bed, wondering what invisible rule I broke, rewinding the day like a crime scene, trying to decode what I said wrong, trying to shrink, apologize, fix, disappear, just to end the silence. We don't talk enough about how communication can be used not just to connect, but to control. How some people never raise their voice, never curse, never break a dish, but can still break your spirit with a quiet that screams, or words that cut just under the skin. It's subtle, it's socially acceptable. It often goes unnoticed, because they're not yelling, right? But silence can be loud in the most violent way. And words, they can be weapons too. Sarcasm disguised as humor, passive-aggressive remarks wrapped in just kidding, criticism masked as just being honest, or apologies twisted into blame. I'm sorry you took it that way. That's not an apology, that's gaslighting. From a psychological lens, this behavior often stems from unprocessed trauma and emotional immaturity. People who never learn to self-regulate use silence or sharpness to regain a sense of control. It's not about resolution, it's about power. Because if I can make you doubt your memory, walk on eggshells, or feel like the problem is always you, then I don't have to take responsibility for what's mine. But here's the truth. Love and emotional safety cannot exist in the same room as manipulation and communication that causes someone to question their worth, their voice, or their sanity isn't communication, it's coercion. I remember confronting someone I loved about this. I said, every time I try to bring up what hurts me, you go quiet or turn it around on me. I feel like I'm always begging for a conversation that never comes. And the response? You read too sensitive. You read too much into everything. That was the moment I knew I had been trained to believe my feelings were an inconvenience. And that's what unhealthy communication does. It makes you mistrust your own heart. But love Real, mature, soul-safe love never uses communication to win, it uses it to build. And the only thing it weaponizes is truth laced with kindness. So if you find yourself using silence to punish or words to wound, pause, ask yourself, am I trying to connect or am I trying to control? Because the difference between healthy communication and emotional warfare is not how loud we speak, but why we speak or don't. If someone uses silence to control or words to shame, that's not conflict, that's emotional abandonment. And healing begins the moment we stop calling that love. One of the most powerful and humbling moments of my life happened across a small kitchen table with someone I had hurt. The kind of hurt that wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the slow, unconscious kind. The kind that builds over months of not listening closely enough, of dismissing their pain because I was drowning in my own. And when they finally named it, when they looked me in the eye and said, "You made me feel invisible," my first instinct was to defend myself. I wanted to explain. I wanted to clarify. I wanted to say, that wasn't my intention. But what I learned in that moment is this: intent doesn't erase impact. And when someone is brave enough to bring you their hurt, they're not asking for justification, they're asking for presence. So I put my hands on the table, took a breath, and said the hardest thing I've ever said. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I want you to know I see it now. I see it now. And I'm sorry. No excuses, no detours, no need to win, just truth delivered with softness. And it changed everything. We often think that speaking the truth means being harsh. We've been taught that honesty is a sword, something to pierce through, to cut deep. But truth without tenderness isn't strength, it's brutality. Healthy communication, the kind that creates healing instead of harm, requires emotional maturity. It asks us to stay, even when the conversation gets uncomfortable. It asks us to lower our voice instead of raising it. It asks us to name what's real, not to shame, but to repair. We are so quick to think in binaries, right or wrong, victim or villain. But the reality of human relationships is far messier. Sometimes the person you love the most will hurt you. Sometimes you will be the one who causes pain. And what separates a healthy relationship from a toxic one isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of repair. We assume they'll end in a blow-up. But avoiding hard conversations is how we let resentment grow wild. It's how we wake up one day, look at the person we love, and feel like strangers. We have to start seeing communication not as a battleground, but as a bridge. Not everything needs to be a debate. Not every disagreement needs a winner. Sometimes the most powerful words you can say are, "Help me understand. I didn't know that hurt you, but I do now. Let's figure this out together." Speaking the hard things with soft hearts means letting go of pride long enough to make room for grace. It means being more committed to understanding than being understood. It means caring more about connection than control. I've learned this the hard way through broken relationships, late-night regret, and the ache of words I never said. But I've also learned that it's never too late to try again. To pull someone close and say, "I love you too much to keep pretending. Let's talk. Really talk." And maybe they won't respond how you want. Maybe it'll still sting. But at least you'll know you showed up with your whole heart. You'll know you were honest and kind and brave. Because the truth is, you don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to agree to understand. You just have to care enough to try. That's what healthy communication looks like. Not perfection, but presence. Not always harmony, but honesty, wrapped in humanity. And in a world that teaches us to armor up, to shout over each other, to hide behind pride, Choosing to speak the hard things with a soft heart is nothing short of revolutionary. Healthy communication isn't a skill you learn overnight. It's a daily decision to be seen, to see others, and to love anyway. It's messy. It's vulnerable. It will require you to sit in discomfort. But if you're brave enough to speak with your whole heart and soft enough to listen with your whole presence, you'll build a relationship where truth doesn't have to hide and love doesn't have to beg to be heard. Say the thing. Say it now. Because silence is loud and love doesn't survive in the dark.